Have you ever felt like life moved on without even checking if you were ready? Let me take you to a moment in time, ancient, sacred, and shockingly silent. A prophet is dead. Not just any prophet, Moses, the man who spoke face to face with God, the man who brought plagues to Egypt, split the Red Sea, called manna down from heaven, and stood between the wrath of God and a rebellious people more times than we can count. And yet, when he died, no trumpet, no national funeral, no statue, just a mountain, just silence. And then a whisper from eternity, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise. Wait, what? That's it? No time to grieve? No pause? No committee meeting? Just arise. And he wasn't speaking to a high priest. He wasn't speaking to Moses' sons. He was speaking to a second-hand man, a shadow, a servant named Joshua. And here's the question that haunts me every time I read this story. What if God moves on and you miss it because you're still clinging to what was? What if the moment you're waiting for, the sign, the preparation, the confirmation, never comes because the command was already given? Let's be honest, we all want our burning bush. We want our moment of clarity, the holy fire, the open sky voice. But sometimes God doesn't wait for our readiness. He just waits for our willingness. And when the mantle falls, it doesn't ask for permission. It looks for the faithful. So let me ask you, have you been so focused on the loss that you didn't notice the baton being passed to you? If you've ever been in a season where the familiar disappeared, the leader you trusted is gone, and now there's only silence and expectation, this message is for you. Because after Moses died, something happened. Actually, 7 shocking things happened. And they didn't just change history, they still carry power to shift your life today. So don't blink, don't scroll, because what happened next was anything but ordinary. Before we dive into the 7 shocking events that unfolded after Moses' final breath, I'd love to ask you for a small favor. If this story already has your heart leaning in, if you've ever felt like life threw you into leadership, transition, or uncertainty before you felt ready, then take just a second to tap the like button. It helps more than you know. And if you're the kind of person who loves deep, soul-stirring wisdom from Scripture and forgotten history that still speaks today, hit subscribe and join this growing community of seekers, thinkers, and believers. You never know. The next video might be the exact word you needed for your next step. Let's keep going, because what God did after Moses died will change the way you see leadership, obedience, and divine timing forever.
When a great leader dies, we expect echoes, news headlines, eulogies, tributes that flood the streets. But when Moses, the most powerful prophet Israel had ever known, took his last breath on Mount Nebo, there was none of that. No national mourning, no public procession, no grave to visit, only silence. Deuteronomy 34 says it plainly. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there, in the land of Moab, and he buried him in a valley. But to this day, no one knows the place of his burial. God himself buried Moses. Privately, quietly, intentionally. And while the people below might have been waiting for closure, God was already preparing for movement. Because the end of a leader is not the end of the mission. It never has been. You see, we often associate God's will with people. Charismatic pastors, wise mentors, brave visionaries. And when they're gone, something in us hesitates. We feel lost, maybe even abandoned. But what if this silence isn't a void? What if it's an invitation? Think about it. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in his prime. But the movement didn't die. Steve Jobs passed away, but Apple didn't stop innovating. Billy Graham left this world, but the seeds he planted still bloom across continents. Because the purpose is always bigger than the person. Maybe you've lost someone who carried vision. A parent, a pastor, a friend, and you've been waiting for someone else to step up, to show up, to speak up. But what if that someone is you? Here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. God doesn't pause the plan just because we're grieving. The world may stop, heaven doesn't. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." And sometimes the purpose outlives the person, not because they failed, but because they finished. So the real question isn't, why did Moses die? It's, what now? Because as one voice fades into sacred silence, another must rise. And that's exactly where we're headed next.
Transitions of power are rarely quiet. We're used to seeing them unfold with debates, elections, media coverage, and votes. Leadership in our world is often earned or fought for in the public square. But in the kingdom of God, leadership doesn't always rise through applause or popularity. It rises through preparation. Joshua didn't campaign for Moses' rule. He didn't post a vision statement or convince the elders to vote him in. He had something better, God's hand on his life. Deuteronomy 34:9 tells us, "Now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him." No poll, no ballot, just impartation. You see, Joshua wasn't a stranger. He had been walking in Moses' shadow for decades, following him up the mountain, guarding the tent of meeting, spying out the promised land. While others feared, he remained faithful. While others wandered, he waited. It wasn't random. It was rehearsed in silence. And when Moses died, God didn't hesitate. Joshua 1:1 and 2 says, "After the death of Moses, the Lord said to Joshua, Moses' assistant, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore, arise.'" That's it. No time to negotiate, no announcement ceremony, just divine succession. And here's where it gets personal. Sometimes we expect God's call to come with clarity, ceremony, even comfort. But more often, it comes wrapped in responsibility. It comes when you're still grieving, still doubting, still wondering if you're enough. But God doesn't choose leaders based on charisma. He chooses based on consistency, not fame, but faithfulness. Think about David. He was anointed king while still a shepherd. Or Esther, elevated to queen not because she lobbied for it, but because her heart was positioned for such a time as this. God doesn't run a democracy. He runs a theocracy, where his decisions are final and his timing is perfect. And when he chooses, it's not always who people expect, but it's always who he's prepared. So if you've ever felt overlooked, maybe you're not being ignored. Maybe you're being trained in silence for something only obedience can unlock. Because the story isn't about ambition, it's about alignment. And Joshua, he rose not because the people picked him. He rose because heaven did. And what happened next proves that God never picks without a plan. Let's keep going.
Joshua didn't ask for the job. He didn't apply for it. He didn't even have time to prepare for it. And yet, in the very next breath after Moses is gone, God speaks to him directly with a command, not a suggestion. Joshua chapter 1, verse 2. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them. Just like that, Joshua became the commander of over 600,000 men, not counting the women and children. And what was his task? To lead an entire nation into enemy territory, to conquer fortified cities, to face giants, to do what Moses himself never did. Now pause and let that sink in. Joshua wasn't a general. He had no military credentials. He was Moses' assistant, a helper, a servant. But now, he's the leader of a divine invasion. And the only thing God gives him is a promise. Joshua chapter 1, verse 5. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. That's it. No battle plan, no blueprint, just presence. Because God doesn't promote you to play it safe. He promotes you to walk by faith. This is where so many of us freeze. We think calling will come with clarity, that promotion will feel peaceful, that elevation will arrive when we feel qualified. But God often assigns us tasks that stretch us beyond our capacity, not to punish us, but to reveal where true strength comes from. It's not your resume that qualifies you, it's your response. And this is exactly what God meant in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Let me ask you, have you ever been given something that felt too big for you? A responsibility you didn't think you were ready for? Maybe it's leading your family through a crisis. Maybe it's starting over after heartbreak, or stepping into a role you never expected. Here's the truth. If the assignment feels beyond you, that's often the sign it's from God. Because He doesn't give us manageable missions. He gives us meaningful ones. And the measure of success isn't how confident you feel. It's how present He is. So if you feel overwhelmed, unprepared, in over your head, you might be exactly where you're supposed to be. Because the next move of God often begins with people who say, I can't do this unless you go with me. And what God tells Joshua next, it changes everything. Let's move on.
Joshua had heard the stories. He had grown up in a generation that watched the Red Sea split like curtains pulled open by an invisible hand. He knew how Moses raised his staff and the waters obeyed. But now there was no staff, no Moses, only a river swollen from harvest season, flowing fast, and a promise ringing in his ears. God had said, "You will cross over." But there was no bridge, no boat, no sign. Just water and a word. Joshua 3:13 gives the instruction. As soon as the soles of the feet of the priests rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters shall be cut off. Not before, not after, at the moment their feet touch the edge. You see, this wasn't the Red Sea miracle. This was something new. Because back then, God moved first and the people followed. But now, God was saying, you move first, then I'll make a way. This is what I call faith in motion.
Not waiting for evidence before acting, but acting because you trust the one who spoke. It's the kind of obedience that doesn't wait for confirmation because the calling was already clear. And it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. We all want to see the dry ground before we step in. We want the job offer before we quit. We want the healing before we forgive. We want the guarantee before the go. But faith doesn't work that way. Hebrews 11:6 says, "Without faith, it is impossible to please Him." Why? Because faith moves even when the water hasn't. Let me give you a modern example. Imagine starting a business, no investors, no audience, no fallback plan. But deep inside, you know God told you to begin. So you launch, and nothing happens. Until suddenly, something does. That's what Jordan faith looks like. It's not showy, it's not easy, but it is holy. And here's the twist. When the priests stepped into the river, carrying the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders, it wasn't just obedience. It was obedience carrying the presence of God. And that's what made the river stand still. Because God doesn't respond to passivity. He responds to presence-led obedience. So the next time you feel paralyzed, waiting for confirmation, ask yourself, did He already give the instruction? If so, maybe it's time to step in, because sometimes the miracle is waiting on your movement. And as the waters rise and your feet feel the cold current, you'll realize obedience isn't about confidence. It's about trust. And trust, my friend, is where the impossible begins. Next, we'll see what happens when obedience turns into unity and a nation decides to follow with everything on the line.
Leadership is one thing, but being followed? That's another story, especially when the one you're following isn't Moses. Joshua had just stepped into the most intimidating shoes in Israel's history. He wasn't the prophet. He didn't speak with thunder. He didn't carry a staff. And yet the people turned to him, and something unexpected happened. Joshua 1:16-18 records it clearly. "All that you command us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Only the Lord your God be with you as He was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your command shall be put to death." That's not casual obedience. That's all-in surrender. These weren't empty words. This was a generation that had watched rebellion cost their parents everything. They had seen the earth open and swallow the arrogant. They had wandered for 40 years because of doubt and division. And now they were done hesitating. You see, something powerful happens when people are united, not just in action, but in urgency. When they've seen what delay costs. When they've buried their past and are finally ready to move forward together. There's a kind of strength that can only be unlocked through shared surrender. And it's rare, because most groups fracture before they align. They argue over leadership style, qualifications, timing, but these people had one focus: the promise. They weren't pledging loyalty to Joshua the man. They were aligning with Joshua the mission. There's a difference between following a person and following God's purpose through a person. And that's a lesson we still wrestle with today. In churches, in families, even in workplaces, we often want perfect leaders. But God doesn't use perfect people. He uses positioned ones, obedient ones. And He blesses the community that chooses unity over opinion. Hebrews 13:17 says, "Obey those who rule over you, for they watch out for your souls. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you." That verse isn't about control. It's about spiritual alignment. Because God moves through order. And when a people come together under one banner, when they say, "We will follow, even if it costs us,"
Heaven responds. Let me ask you, what would happen in your life, in your family, if everyone stopped debating who's in charge and simply aligned around what God is doing? What could be built? What battles could be won? What ground could be taken? Because the Israelites finally understood, delayed obedience is still disobedience, and division delays destiny. So they chose unity, even unto death. And because of that choice, the next miracle was already waiting, and this one would echo the legacy of Moses himself. Let's keep going.
Joshua was ready. The people were united. The river had parted. Momentum was on their side. Jericho, the fortified city standing guard over the Promised Land, was just ahead. And from a military point of view, this was the perfect moment to attack. Morale was high. The enemy wasn't expecting them. Everything made sense on paper. But then something happened that stopped Joshua in his tracks. Joshua 5:15 through 14 says, "And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. Joshua went to him and said, 'Are you for us or for our adversaries?' So he said, 'No, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come.'" Let's pause there. Joshua asks a simple, reasonable question: whose side are you on? And the answer he gets is shocking. Neither. I didn't come to take sides, I came to take over. This wasn't just an angel. Many scholars believe this was a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ himself. And he didn't show up to serve Joshua's strategy. He came to assert divine authority. And in that one moment, Joshua realized something critical. He may be the leader of Israel, but he is not the highest-ranking officer on the battlefield. God's presence had arrived, sword drawn, not to endorse Joshua's plan, but to invite Joshua into God's. This is where so many of us get stuck. We ask, "God, are you with me or with them?" As if he exists to pick a side in our human conflicts. But the real question is, are we aligned with him? Because God doesn't come to rubber stamp our agenda. He calls us to surrender to his. Joshua's response is immediate. He falls on his face and worships. And then the commander says something familiar, something holy. "Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy." Joshua 5:15. Just like Moses before the burning bush, Joshua is brought back to the beginning where leadership doesn't start with strategy, but with surrender. And here's the lesson. Spiritual battles are never won by intellect, weapons, or human will. They're won when we recognize whose authority we're standing under. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Before any wall falls, before any victory is won, God will always test one thing first: who's really in command of your life? Let me bring that home. You might be facing your own Jericho right now. It could be a relationship issue, a financial wall, a decision that feels impossible. And maybe you've been asking, "God, are you on my side?" But maybe the better question is, "Lord, am I on yours?" Because when the real commander shows up, our job isn't to lead, it's to listen. It's to worship. It's to surrender. And it's in that surrender that the strategy becomes supernatural. Because God doesn't need your brilliance. He needs your obedience.
It happened quietly. No announcement, no warning. Just absence.
Joshua 5:12 tells us, "The manna ceased the day after they had eaten of the produce of the land." For 40 years, manna had been their daily miracle. Every morning, fresh like dew on the ground, waiting. No planting, no harvesting, just provision straight from heaven. It was their survival, their sign that God was with them, their comfort in the wilderness. And then one day, it stopped. Gone. Imagine waking up like every other day, expecting it. But nothing's there. The sky is silent, the ground is empty, and no one knows why until someone whispers, "We're in Canaan now. We're not wilderness people anymore." You see, manna was for a certain season, a survival season. But Canaan was about harvest, not handouts, about cultivation, not collection. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes, when God stops providing the way He used to, it's not punishment, it's promotion. He's not abandoning you. He's upgrading you. The wilderness required miracles, but the promised land requires maturity. It's one thing to eat what falls from the sky. It's another thing to sow, to water, to wait, and to reap. It takes faith to gather, but it takes responsibility to grow. Let's make this personal. Maybe you've been in a season where provision was clear, easy, even miraculous. But now, it feels like the manna is gone. The job dried up, the comfort disappeared, the daily signs are no longer there. You panic. You ask, "Did I do something wrong?" But what if the absence of manna isn't a sign you're lost, but a sign you've arrived? What if you're standing in your next season and God is saying, "It's time to plant now. I've already given you the land. The rest is inside you." Philippians 4:19 reminds us, "And my God shall supply all your need according to His riches in glory." It doesn't say supply it the same way forever. It says He will supply it. The method may change, but the source never does. And here's the lesson. God doesn't stop providing. He just starts providing differently. Because new seasons require new systems. New levels require new faith. And sometimes the greatest miracle isn't manna falling. It's realizing you've grown strong enough to farm. So if the sky is quiet, don't panic. Look around. You might be standing in Canaan, and it's time to learn how to reap. What happens next is not what any military leader would expect. It's not what any strategist would recommend. But it's exactly what God commands. Let's move forward.
It was the worst timing imaginable. Israel had just crossed the Jordan. They were in enemy territory. Jericho loomed just ahead, its walls thick, its gates locked. The people were unified. Morale was high. From a tactical standpoint, this was the moment to strike. And then, God gave an order that made no earthly sense. Joshua 5 verses 2 and 3 says, "At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives for yourself and circumcise the sons of Israel again.'" Wait, what? Right before battle? Circumcision? It was unthinkable. This act would leave every fighting man physically weakened and vulnerable for days. No one would be able to fight. No backup forces, no medical teams, no protective walls. It wasn't just painful, it was dangerous. But it was also necessary. Because this wasn't just a military campaign. It was a covenant fulfillment. You see, the generation that had been born in the wilderness wasn't circumcised. They had grown up with God's provision, but not God's mark. They had seen His miracles, but hadn't yet embraced His identity. And before they could take the land, God required a deeper cut, not just physical, but spiritual. Because you don't enter into promise with Egypt still clinging to you. Joshua 5 verse 9 says, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." This wasn't about skin. It was about shame, about shedding the residue of the past so they could walk into the future. And sometimes God does the same with us. Just when you think you're finally ready, He brings you into a place of pain, a place of stripping, a place where your strength is temporarily removed. Why? Because He wants to make it clear you don't win battles because you're strong. You win because you are His. Zechariah 4 verse 6 echoes it. "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." Let's be honest. Most of us want the victory without the surgery. We want the breakthrough without the bruises. But covenant always comes with a cost, and consecration always precedes conquest. Think about it in your own life. Have you ever felt like God slowed you down just when things were finally taking off? Like He wounded you right before your big moment? Like He exposed something in you that you thought you had already dealt with? That's not sabotage. That's sanctification. Because before God gives you victory over the enemy in front of you, He will deal with the compromise inside of you. This is what prepares us for lasting ground, not momentum, but maturity. So if you're in a season of hidden pain, unexpected delay, or internal cutting, don't run, don't panic, lean in, because the wound may be the very sign that you're being marked for something greater. And after the cut comes the call, after the healing comes the shout, and after obedience comes Jericho. Let's keep going.
Moses was gone. The wilderness was behind them, and the promised land, it was finally within reach. But let's be honest, something in moments like these always feels incomplete. Because when someone you leaned on is no longer there, when the voice that once guided you is suddenly silent, it's easy to wonder, can I really do this without them? Deuteronomy 34:10 says, "Since then no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." What a statement! No one like him. And yet, the story didn't end with him. Because the mission was never about Moses. It was about movement. It was about obedience. It was about purpose. And that's the greater lesson. God's promises are never buried with His prophets. They are carried forward by the willing, the faithful, the ones who say yes, even while shaking. Joshua didn't have Moses' voice. He didn't have the burning bush. He didn't have plagues or Sinai thunder. What he had was a history of walking quietly behind greatness, and a heart that said yes when God whispered, "Now, arise." Maybe you can relate. Maybe your Moses was a parent, a mentor, a pastor, or even a version of yourself you've lost. And now you're standing in unfamiliar territory, on the edge of your own Jordan. No pillar of fire, no cloud, just the promise and your next step. Friend, let me tell you something important. You don't have to be the next Moses. You just have to be the first you, with God at your side. Because Jordan moments aren't reserved for spiritual superheroes. They are for ordinary people who trust an extraordinary God. Your Jordan may look different. It might be stepping into leadership or starting over after heartbreak. It might be forgiveness or finally letting go of something that's been keeping you in the wilderness far too long. But here's the truth. If God called you to it, He will carry you through it. He didn't bring you this far to abandon you. He brought you here to cross. Romans 8:31 says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Not fear, not loss, not even the shadow of what once was. Because the same God who split the sea for Moses split the river for Joshua, and He can still make a way for you. So don't wait for perfect peace. Don't wait for all the signs to line up. Don't wait for another Moses. Your Jordan is waiting. And the first step, it still matters more than ever.
Maybe right now you feel like you're standing on the edge. You've walked through wilderness seasons. You've watched leaders fall. You've waited for clarity, for confirmation, for someone else to go first. But what if this very moment is your Mount Nebo? Not a place to bury hope, but a place to awaken courage. Because here's the truth. God never stops moving. And His promises don't expire with the people we lose or the pain we carry. They live on in the hearts of the willing. They live on in the obedience of the quiet ones who say, "I'm scared, but I'll go." So let me ask you, what's your Jordan? What step have you been delaying because you're waiting to feel ready? Friend, you don't have to feel ready. You just have to be willing. And if this video reminded you of something you lost or someone you were waiting for, know this: you are not disqualified. You are being invited. Invited to rise, to step in, to cross over. And if that stirred something in you, if this message helped you feel seen, prepared, or even just a little more brave, then take a moment to like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's more where this came from. And in the comments, tell me, what Jordan are you standing in front of right now? Because I read them, I pray over them, and we walk this road together. And most of all, share this with someone else standing at a threshold. Someone who thinks their Moses is gone and the story is over. Because it's not. The story isn't finished. It's just beginning. Now go. The river is waiting.